When you hear the name Catherine the Great, you probably think of a super powerful queen from a long time ago. But for many people, the first thing that comes to mind isn't about her ruling a huge country. It's a strange and gross rumor about how she died. This story is totally fake, but it has stuck around for more than 200 years. This video is all about looking past that silly gossip to find out the real, much more interesting story of her life. The most famous lie about Catherine the Great is the weird story that she died while trying to have sex with a horse. The rumor says that a harness holding the horse up broke and she was crushed to death. This is completely false. The truth is much simpler. Catherine had a stroke in her bathroom and passed away in her bed the very next day when she was 67 years old. So, where did such a crazy story come from? It wasn't an accident. This lie was created on purpose by her political enemies, especially from the fancy French people and British writers after she died. The powerful men in Europe were not comfortable with a woman who had so much power and wasn't afraid to have an active love life. They judged her with a sexist double standard, which means they treated her unfairly just because she was a woman, something they would never do to a male king. The French revolutionaries who hated her even used the same nasty, made-up stories against Catherine that they had used against their own queen, Marie Antoinette.
The reason this myth stuck around is that it took a little bit of truth and twisted it into a big lie. While she definitely didn't have sex with a horse, she did sometimes choose her boyfriends from the royal cavalry, who were the guys who rode horses in the army. Her enemies grabbed this detail and blew it out of proportion to create a more shocking story. They also knew that portraits of rulers on horses were a way to show how powerful and important they were. By making a disgusting story about her and a horse, her enemies were trying to ruin her image as a powerful ruler. It was a mean, political, and unfair attack meant to make her amazing life seem like nothing more than a bunch of sexual stories, which has always been an old trick used to put down women in power. The real story of Catherine's love life shows a woman who used her romantic relationships not just for fun, but as a clever way to gain and keep power. She wasn't born a Russian princess. She was a minor German princess named Sophie, who was married off at age 16 to the Russian Grand Duke Peter III. It was a very unhappy marriage. Peter was immature, and he was so obsessed with playing toy soldiers that their marriage was not consummated for 12 years. This made Catherine feel lonely and unloved, so she started looking for companionship elsewhere and became very smart and clever.
Even though people called her a nymphomaniac, which means someone who's obsessed with sex, she was actually a serial monogamist. This means she had a number of boyfriends over her life, but she was only ever with one person at a time. Her relationships were a smart mix of what she wanted personally and what would help her politically. She had about 12 to 22 known lovers, many of whom were younger men, but she treated them well and used these relationships to make sure she had support and loyalty from her court. Her most important relationships show how she used her love life to her advantage. Grigory Orlov was a military officer who helped her in the coup to take over the throne from her husband, and she rewarded him with fancy titles and wealth. Stanislaw Poniatowski was a Polish noble who became her lover. After she became Empress, she helped him become the King of Poland, which basically meant Poland was now under Russia's control. Her greatest love was probably Grigory Potemkin, whom she called "my precious Grishenko." Their relationship was a true partnership, and they worked together to expand the Russian Empire, taking over Crimea and building a huge naval fleet on the Black Sea. Their bond was so strong that some historians think they might have secretly gotten married. This shows that her relationships weren't just about her private life, they were a powerful way for her to rule. She used these men as her eyes and ears in her huge country, and she kept them loyal not just with love, but also with gifts and power.
Catherine's time as Empress was not just about her love life. It was a period of huge changes for Russia in politics, culture, and military power. Her rise to power wasn't luck, it was because she was incredibly smart and knew how to get what she wanted. The situation in Russia was a mess. Her husband, Peter III, was an unpopular ruler who was not ready to be a leader. His childish behavior, like playing with toy soldiers all the time, made everyone at court angry. This created the perfect chance for Catherine, who was also unhappy in her marriage. On July 9, 1762, with the military's help, which was convinced by her lover Grigory Orlov, she successfully took power in a sudden overthrow, or coup. Peter was forced to give up his throne, and Catherine was crowned Empress. His death shortly after was a helpful event that made her rule secure. The whole situation was unstable, and the court was ready for a new ruler. Her relationship with Orlov was the key that made the whole thing happen. This shows that her personal life was a huge part of how she became so powerful.
Once in power, Catherine worked hard to make Russia a more European country, which is why people called her Russia's enlightener-in-chief. She loved art and books, and even bought the entire libraries of famous French thinkers like Voltaire and Denis Diderot. Her biggest cultural achievement was starting the Hermitage Museum in 1764, which was her personal art collection and is now one of the most famous museums in the world. Catherine had a big plan for Russia in a document called her Nakaz, or Instruction, from 1767. This was a very modern document that talked about things like getting rid of torture and making punishments less harsh. Smart people in the West praised her ideas as a great example of good government. But in reality, many of these ideas were never fully put into practice. She also gave more power and rights to the nobles, which helped her stay in charge, but made the lives of the poor peasants even harder. This shows that she was a leader who valued smart, progressive ideas, but she always made sure her own power and the stability of her country came first. Catherine's plan to make Russia a powerful country also relied on a strong military. During her reign, she made the Russian Empire much, much bigger, adding over 520,000 square kilometers of land and changing the map of Europe. Her big wins in the Russo-Turkish Wars made Russia the main power in that region, leading her to take over Crimea and control the Black Sea. She also worked with Prussia and Austria to take over and divide Poland, which eventually made Poland disappear from the map. But her rule wasn't always smooth. The Pugachev Rebellion, which was the largest peasant uprising in Russian history, was a turning point. It made Catherine less interested in her more liberal, progressive ideas. The rebellion was led by a man named Yemelyan Pugachev, who pretended to be her dead husband, Peter III. The rebellion was caused by poor peasants and Cossacks who were angry about high taxes and being treated like property. Pugachev promised to give them their own land and freedom, which was a huge threat to Catherine's power. Even though the rebellion was big at first, Catherine's army crushed it in a brutal way. The result of the rebellion showed that while Catherine had good ideas, she would not hesitate to use force to stay in control. It taught her that she was a ruler who needed to defend her power, not give it away. She later argued that revolutions, like the one happening in France, only led to barbarism, which meant they undid all the progress that had been made. This rebellion was the perfect excuse for her to be even stricter, and it showed her that the peasants were a force to be controlled, not to be set free. The true story of Catherine the Great is full of surprises.
She was a German princess who, after taking the throne, made Russia more like the West, made its borders bigger, and started a golden age of art and ideas. She was a super smart leader who outsmarted her rivals both at home and in other countries. At her heart, she was a very smart person who believed in reason and progress, but she also showed that she would always put her own absolute power first. The crazy myths and gossip that people remember about her aren't just random lies. They are twisted, direct reactions to her amazing life. Her enemies took the facts, that she had boyfriends and that she was incredibly powerful, and turned them into gross stories to try and destroy her reputation. The crazy stories, especially the one about the horse, prove that the men of her time had a hard time understanding and accepting a female ruler who didn't act the way they expected her to. In the end, her life story is a fascinating mix of ambition, power, and how people saw her. It reminds us that history is not just a simple good versus evil story, but a complicated human story where facts and fiction often get mixed up. Catherine's story lives on as a powerful lesson that a woman's achievements can be overshadowed by mean and unfair gossip. But if you look at the facts, you will always find a much more interesting and complex truth.